To be clear, if you are married, I am asking if you can afford your expenses, your spouse's expenses, and anyone who lives in your household on your income alone. Story 1. The smartest decision we made when shopping for a house was setting our budget at an amount we could afford on a single income. The thought process at the time was that eventually I would quit my job to become a stay-at-home dad, but it saved me after being widowed that I could afford all the bills on my own salary, albeit with some belt-tightening like firing the cleaning lady and landscaper and going on fewer vacations. Story 2. This is, for me, the bare minimum. The question is, can I afford to spend foolishly? The answer is also yes. Story 3. I can. I am not rich or anything but still doing well enough. I would like to move to something bigger than my condominium, but that might start to stretch the budget pretty thin. Story 4. My wife and I rent, and we barely scrape by. I make about $850 a month and work from home so I can take care of the house and child. Otherwise, we have learned it would become a complete disaster, as who really wants to clean while working 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week? We live in an oligarchy now where the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. There is no middle class. Story 5. Yes, I grew up in a poor family, so I have many habitual behaviors related to poverty. I now earn a six-figure salary, but I still maintain habits of not wasting and living below my means. Story 6. Been doing it for almost 20 years now. Struggled greatly at first, but now I live comfortably below my means. Story 7. In my mid-40s, I have been able to afford those things by myself since my late 20s. I am married now but still pay for most expenses. Story 8. Hello. All of it. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. Took a long time to get here. We did not eat out for years, worked within a weekly budget, and had 2 jobs. Now we are living well. Story 9. I have been a nurse for more than 20 years, and while I am not making a large income, I can pay my bills and have some money to spare for fun, as well as time to spend with my son. Story 10. Financially, hell yeah. Logistically, hell no. If my wife did not have that under control, I would be in trouble. I go to work and make the money. She stays at home and makes sure I do not spend it all. Story 11. I can easily have plenty of money to do fun activities and to set aside for saving on an average income, but I do not live in the dystopian hellscape oligarchy that is the United States, which helps a lot. Story 12. Later, millennial here. I make about $60,000 per year in a high cost of living area, Phoenix. I do have a roommate, but that is more by choice. My budget would work without them, and if I am being honest, they really do not pay that much, about $400 per month. After all mandatory expenses, I have about $25,000 per year after taxes in disposable income. If I had to, I could probably increase that a bit by getting rid of unnecessary things. It was a bit hard getting here. I graduated with $50,000 in student loans during the Great Recession. I started a full-time job making $12.83 per hour and managed to pay most of that off over 3 years. I saved for a couple more years and had a few pay raises. I managed to buy a house before I was 30 without help and all while making under $50,000 per year. I will not lie, it was hard, but it is doable if that is what you want to do. I have friends who make more than me and constantly complain they are broke. I just do not know how. Material possession-wise, I live a decent life. Story 13. My own expenses? Easily. I lived on 1/3 of my gross income. Mine, my wife's, and my kids? No way. I used to cover all 3 of us. Then my industry got decimated. 80% drop in units produced, larger drop in revenue. I took a 45% pay cut to leave the field. Story 14. I am the sole earner for our household. My wife stays at home with the children and does the shopping. She does not bring in money, but she is very good at managing what I earn. Story 15. I currently pay all bills and mortgage payments and cover all other expenses. My roommates do not contribute anything and actually increase the expenses. Story 16. Really? Not a single person in this thread is going to tell us what their job is. Makes me think you are all just role-playing as someone who can pay the bills. Story 17. Living alone is full of people who can pay for everything by themselves and enjoy being independent. It is not impossible at all. Story 18. I am a 32-year-old male, recently single. I own a house that I bought in 2019 and have enough discretionary income to cover all expenses with money to spare. Through a combination of hard work and some good luck, I managed to enter software development without a degree or any student loans to repay. I know this is not typical for my generation. All I have to do is look around for a few seconds to realize how fortunate I am, and I feel bad that so many people are struggling right now. Story 19. I can and do every month, but after all expenses are paid, I am left with about $150. My life is simple but boring. I am surviving, not thriving. Story 20. I started freelancing at 18 and have covered 100% of my costs, including tuition and housing, since I was 20. Story 21. I can, but it took me years to get to that point. I had to learn to be frugal and make things last, as well as how to say, it's nice, but it really isn't a necessity. Also, I never dated, never married, never had casual relationships, and so I have no children, no alimony, no ex-partners, and that is how it is going to remain. Story 22. I can, but I have taken some big risks, and I do not have a consistent work schedule. I have also had some very good opportunities, so it is not like I got here on my own. Story 23. I did it for 10 months. When my wife quit her full-time job to work on call for 32 hours a month in a better company, I took care of us financially until she got a part-time position. Story 24. I'm married and have 4 children. I have been the only provider since we had our first child about 14 years ago. My wife is a stay-at-home mom. I manage everything well. I would not say I am rich, but I am upper middle class. I have a coworker who makes as much as I do, and she lives alone with no dependents, yet she is always broke. Just be smart with your money, and you can make it work. Story 25. I am 38 and single. I am very scared of not being able to manage one day. I do not know if I count since I became a homeowner thanks to my family, but every expense since I moved here is on me. Without their support, I would not be able to have my own house. Story 26. I do. My wife stopped working a few months before we had our first child in 2008. I have been the sole earner since then. Houses, cars, kids' braces, every other expense. All on me. The stress level was intense at first but became manageable over time. Knowing that you are the only thing between your family having a home and being homeless. Story 27. I am the sole provider for a family of 5. My wife stays home with the children. We cannot afford vacations or fancy home remodels, but we manage. Story 28. I couldn't until I finally picked up a better job in 2013. I was 38. Life got so much easier that I kick myself for not having put in any effort before that. Story 29. At 33, I had to move back to my parents. I am a logistics manager and cannot afford Ontario rental rates. Story 30. I can do it all, but I recognize I am incredibly lucky. My fiance's paycheck is basically for her miscellaneous expenses. I pay her bills too, like car and other costs, and part of her paycheck goes to our savings. It is just easier for us because the income disparity is so large. Story 31. Ken, sure, but it is not very fun and it may depend on your definition of truly afford. Not struggling, but far from having it like that, and regularly find myself channeling my parents who just used to sit there looking over everything on a somewhat regular basis late at night. Fewer loose papers nowadays, but any bill that I come across immediately triggers the need to use reading glasses and quadruple check every other bill I have is where it should be before putting the checkbook away. Follow that up with checking current and upcoming deals for everything in my life, and then some couponing, of course. Story 32. I was able to afford everything for about 10 months after I got married. Before that, I was a graduate student and postdoctoral researcher and relied on roommates. After I got married, I was the sole earner for about 10 months, paying for everything and sharing some income with my spouse for things she wanted until she got a job and quickly started making as much and then, soon after, more than I do. Now we split expenses approximately 50-50. Story 33. I am currently 30 years old and have been at the same place of work since I was 19. I bought my house at 25. I struggled financially from 25 to 28, but with some promotions, raises, and buckling down on finances, I can now breathe and save every month. I can also now send myself back to school. Story 34. I have been capable of doing this since I was around 22 or 23, which was in 2015 or 2016. I was single for a time then and bought my own house at 25 in 2017. Story 35. We worked until a younger boss decided we were too old. We lived on retirement funds while facing other young bosses who think Generation Zers are in their 80s. For 6 months, we were unhoused, literally living in a container by the river. And we are not even old. We were almost middle class for the first time in 40 years. Every time we almost catch up, someone pulls the rug out from under us. Story 36. Technically, yes, but I would have to downsize since I am not going to pay for 3 extra bedrooms I do not need on my own. Also, it is much cheaper to split the cost of living with others. Story 37. I currently do, depending on the month. I am the sole earner for a household of 5. Daycare is too expensive for my partner to consider getting a job outside the house right now. Between rent, car payments, utilities, credit card payments, phones, food for 5, gas, school expenses, extracurricular expenses, and family activities, there are some months where we make it and others where we fall a little short. This fall will be the first time all 3 children are in school at the same time, which is a huge milestone toward eventually getting out of debt. Story 38. I have been able to save since I graduated and started working. That is due to keeping expenses as low as possible in a high cost of living area, making career moves over the past 15 years to increase my earnings, and focusing on paying down debt as soon as possible. I downsized after getting divorced and should be free from those expenses. I plan to pay off her last school debt completely before the end of the year. After that, I will focus on maxing out all tax-advantaged accounts, rebuilding my emergency fund, and saving for a property. I could earn much more if I wanted to put in a lot more time, but I am finally at the point where I make enough with a very comfortable work-life balance. If I meet a future partner with similar financial discipline and decent earning power, we would be in a great position to invest a significant amount and improve our living standards and experiences. Story 39. I am very fortunate to be in a position that I can. I made $360,000 last year and live in a relatively low-cost area. Story 40. I am 45 years old, make over $100,000, have my own house, and no children. Can be done, but I have to be smart about what I spend my money on. Story 41. I am able to do it. I am 42 years old. I own my apartment with no loans whatsoever. Right now, I can set aside $400 to $600 a month for savings. Story 42. I make $90,000 to $95,000. My spouse is a stay-at-home mother watching 2 children. I am a member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 81. Our budget is tighter than I prefer. It will be easier when my younger child starts kindergarten, so my wife can get at least a part-time job. If we consider what financial experts recommend for savings, I am not meeting that goal. We have almost no savings, and that is becoming increasingly difficult. I just received another utility letter informing me that the rate is increasing again. Story 43. I do all that for myself, my wife, and 3 children. Although there really is not much savings to speak of, we are in very little debt. 3 cars are paid off and we owe 5 figures on the house. I spent about $7,500 last month paying down the credit cards, which will be paid off this month. Story 44. Plenty of single-income families exist. Many struggle, but many do not. My wife is taking 2 years off for maternity leave, so she will receive a small wage for about 1 year of that time. However, I already cover all expenses with my income. Story 45. I work full-time, and my wife homeschools our children. All our expenses are covered by my paycheck alone. My wife is a nurse with a bachelor's degree. She quit her job a couple of years ago to be home with the kids. I love it and she loves it. When the kids get older, if she wants to return to work, she has my full support and the extra income would be great. But if she chooses to stay home for the rest of our lives, I will absolutely support that as well. Story 46. 160,000 approximately. Divorced, youngest just graduated high school. I have been debt-free for about 7 years except for the mortgage. Biweekly, I employ a housekeeper friend who is living in a hotel with her mother. I am also helping an old high school friend get back on his feet by letting him stay in my camper for free. I am very comfortable because I know how to live well below my means, save, and invest. Story 47. If it were just me, yes. But with a family of 4, there is no way. Daycare, groceries, large mortgage, car, and insurance. Story 48. My wife quit her job because she hated it and needed a change. For about a year, it was just me while she got her real estate license and started making money again. Things were a little tighter, but overall I think our savings only went down about $3,000, and that was because of car troubles. Story 49. I am 46 and live alone. I can cover all of my costs. I almost never stress about money, even though I do not make a lot. I feel grateful for living a very stress-free life. Story 50. I live by myself and have been able to cover my expenses since I moved out at 18, working for the Postal Service. I bought my house and a few cars over the years as the old ones broke down. The only debt I have is the mortgage. Story 51. Approximately $120,000 annually, single, contributing the maximum to the 401k retirement plan, the maximum to the Roth individual retirement account, and the maximum to the health savings account. Monthly expenses are less than $2,000. Own a paid-off Toyota Corolla. Graduated with no student loan debt, starting adult life debt-free. Allocate 1 paycheck for rent, 1 paycheck for other expenses, 1 paycheck into a high-yield savings account, and 1 paycheck into stocks. Generally have leftover funds and spend less than $2,000 monthly on expenses. Live like lower middle class. Avoid fast fashion. Eat out only once or twice a month at most. Do not drink alcohol. Purchase clothing mainly from Costco. Story 52. Yes, I have been working on a single income for 17 years. Wife, for kids, 2 dogs, for cats, 2 cars, house, non-public school, and the usual things that come with family life. Story 53. I paid for myself, my wife, and 2 children for over 15 years alone. That includes everything. My spouse did not work at all. Story 54. I do all that and pay for a lot of my girlfriend's food and some of her random expenses, as well as any entertainment for both of us. Story 55. I'm 38 and capable. I worked 2 to 3 jobs for nearly a decade to pay off everything in order to do so. I can live on under $2,000 a month quite well. Story 56. I currently do and have been doing so since I was 24 years old. I own my home, pay my bills and buy groceries, have a healthy retirement savings account, and a Roth individual retirement account. I own 2 vehicles, one of which is fully paid for. The other will be paid off in August 2026. I will make my final mortgage payment in October 2028. I am not married and have no children, so it is probably a little easier on me than it would be for a person supporting a family. Story 57. I have a high school diploma and no marketable skills. I work a job that anyone can get, even individuals with a criminal record. Story 58. I've been able to budget since I was 22, and it has only gotten easier. Budgeting is a powerful tool. I had roommates for a long time but didn't need them. I saved that extra money to buy and sell a couple of houses and a duplex to reach where I am now. I turned 40 in 3 months and have my own house with no debt. I cook most of my meals, but my wife and I go out for 1 date a week, plus maybe a double date or group dinner or brunch with friends. I still work overtime whenever I am available. You never know when unexpected challenges will arise, so I want to be as prepared as possible. Story 59. This question is likely intended for people in their 20s who are just entering the workforce. Most adults can do this. Some struggle, but most people can. Story 60. When I first moved out from my parents' home, I was making $11 per hour and could afford everything on my own. My rent was $300 for a 1-bedroom apartment. Now I make $52,000 per year and cannot afford to live without a roommate. The apartment I have right now was affordable when I first moved in, but now it costs half of my monthly paycheck. I would not even qualify for this apartment if I applied today. Rent has gone up on average about $200 per month year over year for the past 4 years. My income is not keeping pace. Now, these student loans are coming due again. Story 61. I can't. And I sit in it every day. One of many casualties of the entertainment industry. I have been told by a number of recruiters that my resume is both not technical enough and not creative enough to apply for anything they offer, despite my entire job involving technical work with a dash of creativity. My partner, bless her soul, is the breadwinner and always has been. I lost my job the day I finished moving in with her. She has allowed me to pay what I was paying when I had 4 roommates, and I am still paying that amount despite having moved a few times with her. I live off my credit cards, unemployment benefits, and a few jobs here and there which tend to be harder to keep than finding a job. I have depleted my savings and investments. It is not great upstairs. I have no career, despite working on one for 10 years. I am battling more with the loss of who I was, who I am, and who I wanted to be. Laying to rest the thing I loved doing most for a completely different career, which I have no idea what it would be. Story 62. I do, but I have always lived below my means. Most people's money issues come from wasting money on convenience. Story 63. Even if my wife was gone, I could manage myself and the 2 children. We also prefer a pretty basic life by choice, so our overhead is quite low. Story 64. Yes, I could make it work. We bought our house before we were married and got something either of us could afford if it did not work out. I earn significantly more now. My lifestyle would take a big hit without my wife's income, but I would not be on the street and would still be able to retire. Story 65. It probably depends on your age. I have been doing that since my 20s. To be fair, it was easier to do back then. Story 66. I am 37 years old, single with no children, and I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in a relatively low cost of living area. I have a full-time job in facilities management, and I am rated at 80% disability with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I receive a monthly $2,000 tax-free check for life. Story 67. When I first moved out on my own, I had $20 after paying all my bills and gas to afford groceries, so it was mostly ramen with one of those 50-cent pizzas as a treat for Friday. It wasn't fun. Now, I am actually able to live by myself and can afford everything, but I am just barely saving any money. I think the last time I had more than $1,000 in my bank account was before the COVID-19 pandemic, but then my car broke down and I had to buy another one. I tried getting a roommate to help with the costs, but of the 3 people I thought I could trust, one was only temporary. She was leaving her boyfriend who abused her and needed a place to stay, and the other 2 ended up being completely unreliable. Story 68. I do, but that is because I do not have a car, pets, or children. I have no retirement contributions, and I live very frugally. I live in an illegal rental that is below market. Story 69. I am in Scotland. I could live and run my car without a partner or friend, with equal custody of the children while working the same job, hours, and pay. I would struggle to save for bigger expenses or emergencies, though. Story 70. I can do that because I am in a unique position. The cost of living in my home country is low compared to the rest of the world, and I work abroad most of the year earning a tax-free salary. It is not the most ideal situation, but it has allowed me to pay all the bills, pay for my own wedding, save money, and travel a bit. Story 71. My wife was a stay-at-home mom for 2 to 3 years. I was able to cover expenses and buy a house in a medium to high cost of living area. I got lucky. It was tough at times with a little credit card debt, but I was able to pay it off in 2 to 3 months when my wife returned to work. Savings took a bit of a hit in terms of contributions, as we decided to leverage a higher retirement contribution to cover expenses down the road. Vacations were not even considered. Story 72. I could if I lived alone. My wife earns 1/3 of what I earn, and we have 2 young children to support. We are lucky to have a mortgage rather than rent. Story 73. I make $81,000 a year and live alone. I bought a duplex for $361,000, collect $1,500 per month in rent for the upper unit, and I manage it myself. I own some recreational equipment and have everything I really need. What I do not have is time. When the house needs work and unexpected issues arise, not having a second person is stressful. It is a lot to maintain as a single person with busy hobbies. Story 74. I already live on my own. The only challenge I might face is transportation, as I do not have a car or a driver's license. However, since I live in a big city with over 1 million inhabitants and we have good public transit, it is not that bad. Story 75. My former partner got her dream job out of state in 2023 after we purchased a home in Colorado in 2022. Since then, and honestly for a long time before, I have been doing everything on my own. The house is currently under contract, and I am taking a significant loss on it, but I can no longer afford everything by myself. I also help my adult daughter as she gets back on her feet, support the 2 dogs from my former partner, and somehow manage to keep the lights on and the Wi-Fi running. Story 76. I can do it on my own if I need to. My wife worked a demanding job a few years ago, and half the people quit. They tried forcing the work on her without extra pay. We agreed she should quit, and my income was enough to cover everything without touching any savings. She works again so we can save more, but I have confirmed that my income is enough to cover everything without sacrificing anything. Story 77. If I were a bachelor without animals, I could easily do it. But with a wife, 3 dogs, and 2 cats, I make just under $300 a month to cover everything. Taxes take out almost $500 from each paycheck. I pay for everything except groceries. My wife's income covers that and puts half into savings. Whatever money we have left is play money, whether it is for our addictions, games, date nights, or whatever. When I was in the United States Army, my wife did not have to work and we got by, putting a little over $100 into savings by the end of the month. Story 78. I cannot. I work 2 jobs while my partner is home with our child under 2 years old. She is still breastfeeding to help keep costs down, but it makes for long days for her. We can just manage with what I make from my jobs, but it looks like we are going to have to change internet providers as their costs have increased recently. I will likely have to give up our car lease and get a loan of an old car from family until I can figure out how to pay the bills. Everything has increased so much, and we have been dependent on credit for the past few months. It is coming to a head for us, sadly. The credit payments are due. It has been scary and stressful. Rent is half of our monthly income, and that is considered cheap where we live. Food and gas prices are ridiculous. I am good at finding sales, but even now we are struggling to keep all the bills paid and food in the fridge. We are not starving by any means, but we are robbing Peter to pay Paul every month. Story 79. Retirement contributions? Savings? That would be a clear no. But just hanging on and hoping the car does not break down or any medical bills do not come is how I am managing. I would be much better off if I had not spent the last 3 years taking care of an immature woman and her children, but I finally ended the relationship in January and I am rebuilding slowly. Story 80. I can. However, I rent a small apartment and drive a cheaper car. I work as a welder 40 hours per week. The only savings I have are towards a house and retirement. Savings are taken automatically from my paycheck. Story 81. I'm doing well except for saving money. That is because I spent a lot for Christmas and birthdays earlier this year for family. I had been in a major funk since September last year. I also bought some expensive items for myself. Now, I am working on catching up so I can put money into savings instead of spending it on unnecessary things. Story 82. I am married and definitely could not cover all of our existing costs alone. However, if I were single, I would scale my lifestyle according to my income, and yes, I could absolutely afford to cover my costs. Story 83. I have 2 households and try to cover everything by myself. I am maintaining now but have very little wiggle room. Insurance costs have reduced any breathing room I had. Story 84. My wife covers some bills such as homeowners association fees, car insurance, and other small items, but I cover the major expenses and could cover her costs if needed. She took a pay cut to move to our current city, so it is only fair that I bear the weight. I am lucky enough to be able to afford it. Story 85. I could cover our household necessities on my own, but it would require significant changes to our lifestyle. Story 86, of course. I can save 50% of what I make when I am really focused. However, I design my life to have low expenses. Story 87. I can, and realistically, I have been capable of that since I was probably 26. That said, it is definitely going to be a boring life. Thankfully, my wife and I split expenses, so we have plenty of extra money to use as we please. Story 88. I have been completely financially independent since I was 28. I moved out at 18 and always had roommates. After I graduated from college, my girlfriend and I moved in together. For the first few years, we split our bills 60-40. Then I got a raise and it became 70-30. Fast forward a few more years in raises, about 6 years ago, I started covering our mortgage, utilities, insurance, and about half the groceries. We each buy our own groceries, but we share everything anyway. She is on a family phone plan with her sisters, so I do not pay for that. I cover everything else. Story 89. Technically yes, but without the others to cover part of the bills, the idea of saving money or doing fun activities would not happen. I am happy with how things are. Story 90. Yes, I can. Single-income households with myself, my wife, and 2 children. I live in a low to moderate cost of living area, so it is not bad. We also bought our house 6 years ago for under $180,000 with a low-interest mortgage. We simply could not buy a house like ours anymore. They do not exist. Story 91. I am married, but I think if I were living by myself, I could manage without a roommate. It would be tight, so I would probably choose to live with one to get ahead instead of just getting by. Story 92. I can afford it because I make enough to support my entire family on one income, my wife and 1 daughter. My wife's parents taught her to save, and my parents taught me to save by watching them spendthrift, which I hated. Story 93. I afford all of that and can do a little more, but it would be tight. I really do not do much or go anywhere, but I cover all of the costs. Story 94. Yes, I can. Years of hard work. I had Chapter 7 bankruptcy in my 20s, so I learned to stay out of debt. I am 65 now and still working so my son can attend college without debt. Story 95. I can earn approximately £50,000 in the Northwest. I am comfortable with this income, but it depends on what people consider necessary expenses. For example, I have not been abroad for 5 years, but I happily bought a used demonstration sport utility vehicle because I wanted one. I think it is unlikely that one could do all the things, but you can certainly choose which things you want. Sacrifices are required, but the individual gets to decide. I do not care about holidays. They are expensive for no reason and offer very little benefit. I have also maintained myself in a smaller property than my salary would suggest because I do not need the extra space. Story 96. My current house and expenses make it unlikely that I could travel as much as I enjoy. However, I would not live in my current house or maintain my level of expenses if I did not have a wife and children. Story 97. I can live comfortably on a low cost of living salary of $77,000 per year. I invest approximately $11,000 annually in investments and retirement, and save about $13,000 each year. I bought my house when I was earning $40,000. The mortgage, after numerous tax and homeowners insurance increases, is $605 per month with a 3.625% interest rate. I bought my car when I was earning $50,000. The payment is $230 per month, and I could pay it off soon if I wanted. Story 98. We can run our household and pay our mortgages on either my income or my partner's income and 50% of expected rental property revenue. We would live a very basic lifestyle with no luxuries and sea savings, but we would keep our house, care, and other possessions and be able to afford all the essentials. Story 99. I live alone at 30 and am able to. Modest studio in the heart of the city. I am not crazy about spending or traveling, so my hobbies are generally low cost. The biggest thing is that I completed my undergraduate and graduate degrees on scholarship, so I have no student debt. If you are only paying for yourself and debt-free, a low 6-figure income is quite comfortable even in a high cost of living area. If I were paying for my partner, or better yet, if we had a child, I would be in a bind. Story 100. I am 32 years old and currently live alone in a two-bedroom apartment. I am single with no children. Although the budget can get tight occasionally, I would not trade this life for anything else. Story 101. I bought a house 2 years ago and pay all my bills myself. I pay less for my mortgage than a lot of people I know pay for rent because I made smart investments with a settlement I received after being hit by a drunk driver. In 2 years, I will pull equity from my house to buy another house while renting out this one. I will make enough from the rent to mostly cover my new mortgage, and then I will be financially secure. I have also sacrificed my social life to save money for many years. Some of my friends are jealous because I own a house while they are still living at home with their parents. Story 102. I can because I am 50 and have a good job in savings. Given my situation and the salary being around double the typical one in my area, I have to wonder how others manage. Story 103. Yes. I have since I was in my 20s and was earning half of what I earn now. I live pretty frugally, so many of my costs were low, and I did not buy a car until my student loans were paid off. I am married now and can easily support my wife and me, although the heating, water, and grocery bills have increased significantly. I will also say that it is much easier to pay for things now because when I lived frugally, I invested every extra dollar into the S&P 500. Having that money grow has meant that I have not needed to rely on credit or loans when large expenses have unexpectedly arisen. Story 104. I pay all the household bills and $500 a month supporting my mother-in-law. My wife pays for her personal expenses. Story 105. Yes. It has been that way since we got married. Mrs. Smith worked a couple of years after we got married, then stopped because she was concerned that the physical nature of her job as a plant nursery manager, at a place that was not providing proper gear for lifting heavier things like trees, and the frequent use of ibuprofen and acetaminophen were preventing conception. We took out a mortgage assuming only my salary. So, 23 years later this month, has it been tight some years? Yes, certainly. Could I have made different life choices to reduce that somewhat? Yes, certainly. Are we glad we did it that way? Absolutely. Who do you want raising your kids, especially when they are under 5 and most impressionable? The person you trust most, hopefully your spouse, to share your morals, or a stranger? Story 106. Just barely. The only thing lacking is my savings, but I am still saving. I live in a high cost of living city, and my rent is $2,700 per month for a small apartment in the sky, which really hurts. Story 107. Good question. I could probably afford my house and utilities alone if I only ate beans and rice. Otherwise, my wife helps pay for herself and our 2 boys. Story 108. In theory, I could, but only if I either 1. Gave up living with my parents and saving for a house down payment, found an apartment, and increased my expenses paying for someone else's mortgage instead. Accepted a $4,000 to $5,000 per month mortgage now because the housing market is awful. This is probably doable if I live like a broke college student, but very risky if anything happened to my job. Saved another couple of years to afford a bigger down payment, or if the interest rates on housing dropped back to 3% or less. Then I could. But I'm in that difficult limbo of yes, I technically could afford it, but if I do it now, I'd just barely be scraping by. If I wait a little longer and live at home with the cost of living covered, there's a chance my savings could outpace inflation enough to be more comfortably affordable. Story 109. I do, and I am doing just fine. Things only get easier as time goes on. My mortgage will be paid off before the end of the year. Story 110. After a decade into my career, I think I can see that all frivolous expenses need to be eliminated, including eating out too often. I would have surely said it was manageable if I were renting my apartment. Now, as a homeowner, it is getting tighter and I make over $150,000. Story 111. 31-year-old single male living alone in the South. All my bills, 401k, car, apartment, internet, insurance, and other expenses fit within one biweekly paycheck. Story 112. I think the big question is, what is your lifestyle? Can you afford your lifestyle? I have used this scale in the past for questions about living expenses. Story 113. Yes, all expenses have been covered since my first job out of college, including the brief period of unemployment and starting a new business after the market crash of 2008. Story 114. If not for the 30-something thousand dollars we spend on our nanny for our children per year, and if my wife would stop spending so much money on online shopping as a way to avoid life, we would be just fine on my salary. Story 115. I can. I even have an emergency fund set up to cover 6 months' worth of expenses if I lost my job. It came in handy when the government employees and contractors started getting let go. Story 116. I can live comfortably in a different country than where I was born, but it was pretty much the same there as well, maybe with a bit less savings. Story 117. I can, but with 2 children and a stay-at-home wife, it is hard for me to do it. We have all the essentials at home, including groceries and a car, but we lack a better lifestyle, such as traveling more often. Story 118. Does being married count? If marriage does not count, then I can easily cover my expenses and have money left over for myself. If marriage does not count, I would just cut down on something, probably food. Story 119. I live with and pay rent to my parents since it is cheaper. I am trying to plan moving back to the city on my own, but rent prices are very high, with a minimum of $2,000 per month almost everywhere. The commute will also be difficult. Additionally, everything reasonably priced has problems with bugs, rats, or crime, so it is either an expensive rental or nothing. If that becomes too much of a hassle, I might buy something here to stay close to my family. Story 120. I do not have problems except when my wives have birthdays. One is in late January and the other on the 1st of February. That gets expensive. Story 121. I could probably live where I am, but the budget would be significantly tighter. I would be more likely to require help if more than one, or one very large, expense arose. I would not be able to live as comfortably as I do now, but I would most likely be able to survive. Story 122. With my current job, I would need to find a place that costs between $800 and $1,000 for me to afford everything. This would leave me with $300 to $500 per month for other expenses. Fortunately, right now I have about $1,200 left per month for other expenses. I need to learn a new skill before I move out or start a family, but ultimately I should be able to live on my own if I want to. I currently live with family. Story 123. I can and do provide for a family of 3. My wife's income is largely used for vacations and splurges. My income covers all the bills, necessities, and savings. Story 124. I could, but it would not leave much for discretionary activities. I also would not be maximizing my 401k. I would just contribute 15%. Story 125. I will be 31 next month and have been doing this for 5 years now, managing mortgage, car, insurance, escrow, phone, and other expenses without any help. I had a friend and his child stay with me for a year, where I charged $100 in rent as a token so he could get back on his feet, but $1,200 does not go far. Story 126. If I were single, yes. With the kids and everything, my wife works too. However, there were at least 2 years or more in my life when I lived alone and paid all my bills. That was in the 2000s. Story 127. Hi. My parents, neither of whom ever earned above the poverty line, so I have been doing this for literally the last 30 years. Story 128. I live alone. I received some help from my parents when I bought my first house and the one I am in now. However, I have put a lot of work into it and doubled its value mostly on my own. I do receive significant gifts for Christmas and my birthday from my parents, such as a $500 gift card to Home Depot. But for the most part, I do everything on my own. If I were not doing home improvement projects, I could easily afford everything myself. Story 129. I own a house that I bought during the last housing crisis for a very low price. I pay all the bills for my wife and 2 children, working as a university graphic designer. I am incredibly lucky, but sometimes things get stressful when I feel overwhelmed. Things will improve soon, as my wife is starting school again to pursue a new career opportunity. Story 130. I rent a small apartment and have a very good local government job treating local wastewater. I am doing fine completely on my own. Story 131. I have a partner, so we split the mortgage and food costs. I cover my half, credit card, and all other expenses with 800 to 900 pounds left over. Story 132. I do, but I am 57 and have been able to live on my own since 1990. I have been single for 8 years and am making it work. Story 133. I can, but being married is the only thing that allows me to save money in my current living situation. Then again, being married and having children is responsible for a significant increase in monthly costs, so it probably evens out. Story 134. I am 49 now. I struggled in my 20s but started moving in the right direction in my 30s. I retired from my job with full disability from the military. I have a new job and now I make more money than I know what to do with combined. I still live simply but could afford to step it up if I wanted. It just does not feel right, though. I am scarred from my 20s when I usually did not have 2 pennies to rub together. Getting divorced helped. Turns out, I was not the one spending the majority of the money. Story 135. I did it for about 4 years while our children were young. I had to work an extra 8 hours a week to do so comfortably. Story 136. I can, but it would not be a comfortable lifestyle. I also would not be saving for retirement, but I am not doing that anyway. Story 137. I have done it ever since I got my first job that lasted longer than 4 months, so roughly since I was 24. Story 138. Always have. After the divorce, I let my ex live in the property we still share, paying just the mortgage, which is far below market rate, and paying her support payments. I went from solid mid to upper middle class to lower middle class level of living. I just lost my job, and the market is tough. It looks like it will take a while to find a new job, so we will see what happens to my savings this year. Story 139. Yes, but I do not know that it is the norm. I earned a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering, and no debt thanks to my parents, so that certainly is not hurting my odds. Story 140. I am a 24-year-old male. I am fortunate enough to be able to rent a full house to myself. It is my landlord's old family home, and I am the first non-family member to live in it. I have lived there since 2021 and do not plan on moving until I buy a house. If I were not in my current housing situation, I probably would have a roommate or live in a less desirable apartment. Housing is the biggest financial factor for me. I do not have a car payment either, which is a huge plus. Story 141. I am married but could afford it on just my income, though we would only have about $2,000 a month for discretionary spending and savings. With my wife's income, we have $4,000, which is a much more comfortable buffer. Story 142. I can support us both on just my income, and a bit is left over. My girlfriend makes the same amount as I do, so we have saved up a reasonable cushion for unexpected expenses. She does not really buy anything. Story 143. In the past 12 out of 14 years, I have lived alone in my house. There have been some difficult times due to work slowdowns, so I am not as far ahead as I would like when it comes to retirement. However, I have no debt apart from my mortgage. Story 144. I do all of that for myself, my wife, and my father. All my wife's money goes to vacations. Between work and my side business, I make around $90,000 after taxes, and I own my home, but I pay close to $1,000 a month for the mortgage. I am on the Mid-East Coast. Story 145. Yes, we could absolutely live on my income alone. It might not be very fun and definitely not extravagant, but we would survive without a doubt. This was actually a hard requirement of mine when we chose our budget for buying a home, so yes, I thought about it. I earn about $40,000 per year after taxes and live in one of the most heavily taxed countries in the world. Story 146. No. It has been getting more expensive every couple of years. I live with my roommate and 2 children. It has its pinching times, but it has been okay for the most part. Story 147. I cannot manage on my income alone and can barely manage on my spouse's income. This leaves no room for savings, emergencies, or retirement. With my salary added, we are able to do those things plus enjoy a little bit of fun. Story 148. E6 in the Navy for 6 years, living alone in Hawaii. I can afford everything in a two-bedroom apartment and do not need a roommate. I am not wealthy in the military, but when your income nearly matches the economy, it is definitely easier. Story 149. Managing here, 38 years old, single, about $91,000 pre-tax, 2 dogs, a cat, 2 vehicles, own my home. Okay. I am buying it from the bank, but just my name is on it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.